Welcome to this course in linguistics. What I'm hoping to do with this presentation is to answer some questions that you might have, or maybe that you should have, I guess, about the subject of linguistics. Questions like, what is it and what's it good for? And also to provide a kind of general outline for our first unit and to give you some context for understanding the different readings I've asked you to do for this unit. I'll start with a really basic definition of linguistics, and I'll say more about this in just a moment, but for now let's start by defining linguistics simply as the study of language. And with that, too basic definition, I want to jump right ahead to what maybe one of the most burning questions in your mind as you're sitting there thinking about all the other things you could be doing this summer instead of taking this course. Why should you care about the study of language? What are you doing here? What's linguistics good for? And I'll give you 3 answers to that question. First, it'll make you rich and famous. Okay, it probably won't, but linguistics is a useful field that's important to a variety of professions, so maybe a more reasonable claim is that knowing about language can help you in certain jobs. It can matter in law, for instance. You may have heard about a legal case a few years ago in which a company ended up losing more than $2 million over a dispute of about an ambiguous comma, of all things, in a contract they'd signed. And later on in the course we'll look at another chapter that specifically deals with the connections between linguistics and law. Linguistics is also important in careers like speech pathology and speech therapy, where it's important to understand how the human vocal tract works to make the sounds of language. It's important to computer scientists, people who develop voice recognition software in particular. Anytime you've used the voice search feature on your smartphone, you're benefiting from the work of linguistics. Linguistics also matters in issues of social policy. You might be familiar with how the linguist John Baugh has done research showing that some businesses discriminate against minorities based only on the sound of their voice. And of course, perhaps most obviously, linguistics is important for teachers. Whether you're teaching literature in high school or an ESL class to a group of adults in South America, knowing how language works is important for anyone who wants to help other people use a particular language more effectively. A second reason this course is important is because the types of linguistic analysis I'll be asking you to do is excellent practice for what might be the most important ability you can take away from any college course, and that is the ability to see something that you thought was familiar in a new way, see something you thought you knew differently. See, we use language all the time, so we get so used to it that it becomes transparent, kind of like the air that's all around us. It's absolutely essential to our survival, we use it all the time, but we basically ignore it. To be able to look at something like that that's right there in front of your face and to analyze it, in some ways, that's the hallmark of what it means to be educated. And language makes kind of the perfect medium to practice that exact skill. And the fact that language is everywhere leads to what I think is the most important reason to take this course. Language is the tool we use as humans to get things done. Think about everything you've done today that would have been absolutely impossible without language. It seems to me that beyond the general desirability of being able to analyze a familiar phenomenon, the study of language in particular is super important because language governs just about everything we do as a society. Like I said, it's the tool we use to get things done, and it's important to understand how our tools work. So with that in mind, what the heck is linguistics anyway? What does it mean to say that it's the study of language? I've asked you to look at a short article from the Boston Globe and to poke around the LSA website to get an overview of this, but I'll say some things here that will kind of lay the groundwork as we move through the course. Linguistics is the study of language, singular, but that doesn't mean it's the learning to speak a bunch of different languages, plural, right? You don't ask a linguist, how many languages do you speak? That's kind of the cliche thing you do when you find out someone's a linguist, and it's annoying. For instance, I know English, I'm proficient in Spanish, and I can read Latin if you give me a lot of time and a really good dictionary, but that's it. I've had 1 semester of German, a semester of American Sign Language, and we all know how much you learn in 1 semester of a language class, right? With my Spanish and Latin, I can usually make sense of written Portuguese or French or Italian if I'm reading them, but then all those languages, just like Spanish, are modern versions of Latin, so that's not really a big deal. The most frequently cited estimate for the number of languages in use on the planet right now is around 6,000. So, a generous estimate of the languages that I'm somewhat familiar with leaves me in the neighborhood of 5,992 languages that I know nothing or next to nothing about. So when we study linguistics, we're not studying languages, plural. We're not trying to learn languages as much as we're studying language in general, that human capacity to learn language. And when we do that, we use a variety of methods that are different from the sort of close reading skills that you think of most frequently in English classes. We're not reading novels. Linguists approach the study of language scientifically with tools from sociology, psychology, and other biological sciences like neurology or even genetics. In fact, Noam Chomsky, whom you've read a little bit about if you started The Language Instinct, famously said he's not even really all that interested in language, but only in using language as a tool for understanding how the human mind works. And, if you want to do that, it's a pretty good tool. Within linguistics, then, there's a number of subfields, many of which we'll be covering in the course. There's phonetics, which studies the actual sounds of language, measuring them acoustically and how they're produced by the vocal tract. Closely related to that is phonology, which deals with how the sounds of language interact with each other, and which sounds are essential to language and which ones are accidental, kind of the systems of sounds within language. Morphology deals with how words are put together from smaller units, like how you can attach "un" to the front of a word like happy and change its meaning. And syntax deals with how words get strung together into phrases and sentences. Just a side note about syntax, this is what most people have in mind when they talk about grammar, the way you put words in order in a sentence to make them make sense. When a linguist talks about grammar, though, they're much more likely to include phonology and morphology along with syntax, too, because grammar really refers to all the different rules that we follow as we string sounds together to make meaningful language. Other subfields of language study include semantics, the study of meaning, and pragmatics, the study of how people use language to get things done. For example, if I say, "It's cold in here," you get up and close the window, or you give me a blanket or whatever. On the surface, all I did was make a comment about the temperature, but it led you to do something that was probably my goal the whole time, and we both know it. There's historical linguistics, the study of how languages change over time, and sociolinguistics, the study of how groups of people use language in different ways. Psycholinguistics, or neurolinguistics, deals with how the brain handles language. Language acquisition studies, not surprisingly, how people learn languages. And we could keep going with fields like forensic linguistics, computational linguistics, and so forth, but a lot of those names seem pretty self-explanatory. As we move through the course, it'll probably be helpful also to have some notion of where the study of languages come from. So I want to give now a super brief history of linguistics. And note that I don't mean, again, a history of language. We'll get to that in Unit 3. I mean a history of how people started studying language in the ways that we'll be doing in this course. I think this is important, again, because the ways we're going to be studying language are probably different from the ways that most English majors or even other majors have approached language in the past. This is going to be, of course, a Eurocentric history, since the language we're using and the academy we're working in comes out of European traditions. For a long time, there wasn't really any such thing as linguistics as a scientific study, but there was rhetoric, the study of how people use language to persuade others, and philology, the study of the language of historic and literary texts. Then, in the late 18th and early 19th century, folks started to notice the relationships among languages that they didn't think had much in common before that. You can see this, for instance, if you compare Latin and Greek, which we've known are related, with Sanskrit, which is an ancient language in South Central Asia. You can see in the chart the relationships between English and Latin and Greek and Sanskrit, and the similarities are pretty striking there. And these are just 5 examples I've pulled somewhat at random. We could multiply these. There's hundreds of examples, ways we could show the relationships between these languages. So it became popular to study languages and search for commonalities among them and to hypothesize about how they might be related, and this was known as comparative linguistics. At the turn of the 20th century, a French scholar named Ferdinand de Saussure made a couple of distinctions that remain pretty important. I'm not really concerned about your being able to name drop Saussure, but I want to emphasize this distinction between what he called parole, which is the speech that comes out of your mouth, the things that people actually say, and langue, which is the set of rules in your head that govern how you put words together, kind of an ideal language. Langue is the whole system of language, and parole is the actual output of that system. Or another way to think about it is that langue is what you can do with language, and parole is what you actually do with it. This distinction becomes important because it's very similar to a distinction that Chomsky makes between competence, what you can do, and performance, what you actually do. And since Chomsky is interested in the mind, he's really only interested in competence and not at all interested in performance. And this distinction really lies underneath a lot of the debates within linguistics that we'll maybe hint at throughout the course, but that you should be aware of. After Saussure, in the early 20th century, scholars studying language started to notice that languages that were native to the Americas, particularly some of the North American Indian languages, that they were important, and noticed some of the differences between these languages and the familiar European and Asian languages. And this really forced them to expand their ideas about what's possible in languages and how languages can work. This is when a linguist named Worf was doing his work, no relation, of course, to the Star Trek character. And you've read about the famous Sapir-Whorf hypothesis in The Language Instinct, or you will if you haven't done so already. Fast forward to the mid-20th century, and Chomsky started to look at language not as a sort of behaviorist, memorized, trained behavior, the way that it had been popular in the early 20th century, but instead as the product of the human mind. This is really where Pinker takes up the story, and what we're getting from Pinker is a very Chomskyan view of things. This is the orthodoxy now, though yes, as I've hinted, there are plenty of linguists out there who disagree with Chomsky, who, like I said, might be interested in performance rather than competence. And they really emphasize the social nature of language as opposed to the individual mental nature of it. But even opposing Chomsky, even opposition to Chomsky, is a reaction to Chomsky. He's really the starting point for linguistic study now. So that's all background for our first unit for the course, and for the course in general. Here's your task now. The first thing you need to do, if you haven't already, is complete the background readings for the unit that are described on Blackboard, and dive into the discussion forums. Remember that your course grade in English 345, I'll be looking for at least 2 substantive posts each week in the discussion forums, and you can use these posts however you see fit. Answer a question that I've posed. You can get a sense from those questions of what I think is important in the readings, maybe get an idea for what sorts of things I'll be looking for in the tests. You can respond to someone else's answer, whatever. I'm really looking to generate discussion, and from that discussion to allow you to check how well you're understanding the readings, and also to further your mastery of what you're reading about. You can also, in the discussion forums, ask a question of your own based on the reading. If something isn't making sense and you'd like some clarification, certainly that's fair game for the discussion forums. Because of the nature of this first unit, there aren't really any exercises to complete this week. Instead, your participation in the discussion forums is how you can check your understanding of the material. We'll have exercises for some of the future units, particularly in Unit 2 when we get to phonology and morphology and syntax. The test for this first unit will be available on Thursday, beginning at midnight. The test will cover the material in this lecture and in the readings. It's open book, and you'll have 2 hours to complete it once you open it, though I'm almost certain that you won't need that much time. It'll be pretty short. Once you open it, you can't leave it and come back to it, so make sure you do have time to complete it, to devote to it before you start. The exam is due, meaning it must be submitted by noon on Friday, June 28th. Typically, you'll have 2 full days to complete the exams, but I want to have the grades on this first exam back to you before the following Monday, so it'll be due by noon this Friday. One last thing, you'll also want to be thinking about a topic for your final project. I've got that assignment sheet up on Blackboard, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you have or to help you decide on a topic. As you know from the syllabus and the assignment sheet, the formal proposal for that project is due by July 15th. And that's still a ways off, but I wanted to give everyone a chance to get into the course a bit before deciding on a topic. So, with these tasks in mind, go ahead and dive in. This course is going to be a lot of work, obviously, compressing an upper-level course into a full, that's supposed to take a full semester into a summer schedule, but I'm very happy to help you in any way that I can. Good luck.